Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'd like to thank my host in particular, but also all of you for letting me come over and offer a bit of an American perspective to a conference that's devoted mainly to European and Russian relations. However, it's always good to remember that the United States is a member of the OSCE, and just recently Secretary Kerry gave a very strong statement at the plenary session in which he underscored the importance of the OSCE and the commitments of the Helsinki Final Act, and noted the deep connection between security and fundamental freedoms and human rights, which is exactly what we're all talking about in Ukraine. And I will note that it's always useful for me to remember that it was the Europeans who led the way in the creation of the third basket, that there was great reluctance in the US executive at the time, and particularly Henry Kissinger. And much later, President Ford expressed regret and that he had been wrong to be so resistant, and really remarked upon the value of that development. And although it's also very nice to talk about what our governments did, it's really the people who acted on those guarantees in this city and other ones nearby, and people in this room, people in this panel, who really changed the course of history. Right now, with regard to Ukraine, there's breaking news overnight from the U.S. Two things happened in the last day or two. First of all, President Obama tried to discourage the Congress from adopting a new bill of sanctions on Ukraine, and the Senate did it anyway, late yesterday. And I'd like to point out, I think it's often used as a shorthand to talk about sanctions. It's actually a broader bill than that. It talks about not only sanctions on, related to arms shipments and against individuals who are doing things like that, but it also it devotes a section to support for broadcasting to counter Russian state propaganda. And it was a theme that Ms. Beck mentioned. That theme, it is very pernicious in the United States, and yet it's also getting a lot of attention, and people are beginning to try to develop responses to it. There's a lot of study of it and how we should respond. By the way, Russia's not the only country that does this. China is extremely effective in the United States with television, and both Russia and China have the inserts in our major respected newspapers. And we're all waiting to see if the new owner of the Washington Post, who is a gazillionaire, doesn't feel the need to get revenue anymore from China. But so far he hasn't done that. But people have asked him to stop helping China spread their message. In talking about Ukraine and the transatlantic response, President Obama has certainly made a big emphasis on unity, and that's been a theme here. He seems to think that the most important thing is unity and avoiding, he said yesterday in a speech, avoiding cracks in the coalition. I would tend to think that it matters more what the substance of the position is than whether it's unified or not. That I think is exactly what we're going to see now in the US political context as Congress moves ahead with sanctions. I don't quite know what's going to happen since the Congress is going to go end its session, but if it's the popularity of that bill on Ukraine, which I'm sorry, I meant to mention, also has a section on support for Russian democracy. That is very significant. I suspect it will be carried through to the next Congress, and that will change the tone of the debate in the United States, and I hope also across the Atlantic. The two things that I think also will change what's going on in the United States, and maybe also then the way the United States relates to its allies on this topic, is first the results of the midterm election on November 4th. The Republican Party took control of the Senate fairly decisively, which was kind of predicted, but you never know. And now in President Obama's last 2 years, he will face Republican control of both the Senate and the House. And I don't like to be too partisan about it, actually. I think this Ukraine bill shows that there's really strong bipartisan support on that issue and on support for Russian democracy. But just the politics of it mean that the Republicans will now have control of the committee chairman and the procedures and the floor action in the Senate and the House. And that's really very significant going forward. Some of the personalities you've probably heard about, Senator Corker, who will likely be the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he, along with Senator Menendez, a Democrat from New Jersey, were the co-sponsors of this Ukraine bill. And so that bodes very well for, I think, continued bipartisanship, but also this dynamic that often plays out when the White House is in one party and the Congress is controlled by the other. And that's happened quite a lot over the years. For example, on China, it was Republicans who gave Bill Clinton a very hard time on China human rights issues. And, you know, for good or bad, that tends to, some human rights issues become much more, I wouldn't say politicized, but they get more attention under conditions like that. The other thing that you're probably all aware of is that we're entering into the 2016 presidential campaign. And usually foreign policy is not a big issue for our presidential elections, but it seems to be much bigger this time around, partly because of President Putin's aggression in Ukraine and also because of the concerns about the Islamic State. There were certain contests in the midterm election in which you could tell that was an issue. Another really interesting thing to watch is that former Secretary of State Clinton will be everyone assumes she will be running, and so she will have to defend her record on foreign policy, which she was Secretary of State for several years. She is associated with the reset policy. I think she doesn't know how to handle that, actually. You might want to read the chapter of her memoir about Russia policy, in which she actually tells a couple of stories about President Putin that I have no idea. She doesn't even know if they're true, but he told them to her. But in that, she's a little ambivalent, and she may have to, under pressure from certain kinds of Republican candidates, she may well have to distance herself from President Obama, and that will be interesting. Will she, be a little more hawkish on Ukraine? Will she reiterate her support for Russian Democrats? I hope so. And then she'll be facing I don't know how many, 10 or so Republicans at the moment who seem to be considering getting into the race. Some of them you'll have heard of. They kind of range from maybe the extremes of internationalist Republican to isolationist Republican, with Marco Rubio, a senator from Florida, being the one who is most identified as a kind of a Reaganite Republican, and then Rand Paul, who is a senator whose father actually was the head of the Libertarian Party and takes a very isolationist view, although he's trying to kind of moderate that a little bit. And then in between, there are a ton of others. And the only other one I might mention is that some people predict that Mitt Romney might revive his bid. And I don't know if it'll be funny in translation, but that would really be, you may remember that Romney was excoriated for calling Russia the United States' #1 geopolitical foe during the campaign, and he was laughed out of television studios all around the country. And only apparently President Putin has, sort of made this claim now credible and restored his credibility a little bit. I don't think he'll actually run, but it does have people rethinking how much Russia ought to be a topic in our campaign. And since I'm asserting that Russia will be a big issue in the future in the next couple of years in the United States, I think it's absolutely vital that Russia not become associated in the minds of Americans with President Putin, and I don't think he is. I don't think he's conflated with Russia, but it takes a lot of effort. People are very interested in the efforts of human rights activists here, independent politicians and journalists, but it takes. It's very natural when countries deal with each other to slip into the shorthand of referring to Russia as a monolith, and we all know that it isn't. Just to if you'd like me to briefly talk about the Magnitsky Act, I guess that is the principle of the Magnitsky Act, is that you can make distinctions about people's behavior, and our penalties and our policies ought to make that distinction. And that was, I think, the genius of the Magnitsky Act. I mean, it's tragic that it took those events, the death of Mr. Magnitsky, to bring that about. But that was a huge development in Russia policy, as you know, supplanting the old Jackson-Vanik, beloved Jackson-Vanik Amendment, which human rights activists relied on, even after it no longer truly was applicable or on target in some ways. But the Magnitsky Bill has huge implications, not only for Russia, but it has completely brought about, it's revived the human rights lobby, so to speak, in the United States. After China was granted most favored nation status in 2000 and it was made permanent, for a decade, there was really no discussion of using economic pressure in human rights, and that's no longer the case. So that's a major development. Thank you. I think that's all for now.
Да, спасибо. Спасибо большое.